We will now continue to part 2 of this presentation. Making a better environment for turf may not be the only solution for removing or controlling the weeds that are currently present. An herbicide application may be necessary to rescue the site. You should select the right herbicide for the job. The herbicide should be safe on the desirable turf species, be effective on the target weeds, be safe on other desirable non-target plants, have an appropriate formulation for how you will deliver the herbicide, and, most importantly, have a label that permits the use you intend. When applying an herbicide, consider whether the conditions for applying the herbicide are appropriate, including the time of year, at what life stage the weed is at, and the local weather conditions. Provided the conditions are met for you to apply an herbicide, be sure to follow the herbicide label's directions. It's the law. When you apply the herbicide, you will want to make a uniform application to the site, whether it be via a blanket application, which means treating the whole lawn, or a spot treat application. Follow-up applications may be necessary, so pay attention to application interval and any other restrictions that may limit how frequently and how much of the product can be applied. Finally, you will want to evaluate the results to determine how effective the herbicide application was. Herbicide use in weed control is often necessary. However, we still want to limit the instances in which we are using herbicides. Therefore, be sure to note indicator weeds and monitor their invasion potential. This includes setting thresholds for an acceptable number of weeds for the property or for priority locations. Consider using a spot treatment instead of a blanket application to only treat the areas where weeds are observed. Finally, and most importantly, incorporate good turf cultural management practices to discourage weeds from being competitive again. Some weeds, such as crabgrass, can be quite competitive at lower mowing heights, less than 2 inches, and simply raising the mowing height can increase the competitiveness of the turf compared to the crabgrass. If herbicides are deemed to be necessary, here are some important things to consider before the application. The herbicide label will contain information regarding necessary personal protective equipment or PPE. Other things to consider include the environmental impact, the effectiveness on target weeds, the weed's life stage, the range of other weed species controlled, the longevity of control based on the conditions, and finally, the potential injury to non-target plants. Other factors to consider include the feasibility of the application. This is related to the thresholds that we discussed earlier. The formulation of the herbicide may require a different delivery mechanism or the use of a tank additive, such as a surfactant or an adjuvant, that will assist with the application or uptake of the product. The herbicide mode of action, or how the herbicide is taken up and affects the weed species, will help determine how and when the herbicide should be applied. In some cases, the use of a particular herbicide may affect future maintenance practices. For example, applying a pre-emergent herbicide may limit your ability to reseed the area for an extended period of time. Weather patterns can also affect the effectiveness of an herbicide application. When in doubt, consult the herbicide label for specific instructions and precautions. Equipment necessary for the application and for the applicator's safety, such as personal protective equipment, may need to be ordered or restocked. To select the best herbicide for the application, we need to discuss some terminology. Pre-plant or broadcast herbicides are applied prior to seeding or sodding to control all existing vegetation. Glyphosate is a very common herbicide in this category. Pre-emergence herbicides form a barrier in the soil such that weed seedlings are destroyed prior to emerging from the ground. They do not prevent seed germination. They are most effective at controlling annual weed seeds that germinate at specific times of year. Timing is crucial with these types of herbicides. Post-emergent herbicides are applied to weeds that have germinated, emerged from the ground, and are actively growing. Young plants are generally more susceptible to these types of herbicides compared to mature plants. 2,4-D is a common post-emergence herbicide that is used to control broadleaf weeds. Some of the common pre-plant herbicides include general vegetation killers such as glyphosate, glufosinate, and diquat. The brand names for these herbicides are Roundup, Finale, and Reward. Some organic pre-plant vegetation killers are also available, but they have limited efficacy. Examples are pelargonic acid and various formulations of citric and acetic acids in combination with plant oils. Perennial grassy weeds are the most difficult to control of all the types of weeds. They are best controlled with non-selective herbicides. Examples of these weeds include quackgrass, bromegrass, tall fescue, creeping bentgrass, and rough bluegrass. Remember that a weed is simply a plant out of place. Tall fescue is an example of a commonly planted turfgrass species that can sometimes be an undesirable weed. Also remember, reseeding or resodding will be necessary following the application of non-selective herbicides. Pre-emergent herbicides are often used to prevent annual weedy grasses from emerging. This includes pendimethalin, trifurulin, prodiamine, dithiopyr, and corn gluten meal. How these products affect turf seedlings varies, and you should consult the product label to determine how soon after application you will be able to seed with turf species. Some products are specifically designed to be used in conjunction with seeding because they can selectively reduce weed seed emergence. Examples are Siduron, Mesotrione, and Quincloric. Selective post-emergent herbicides are available for many weed species. However, they are generally more effective on young broadleaf weeds. These selective herbicides may still cause some injury on the turf, so they should be applied only to turf that is actively growing and not stressed. Some of the common post-emergent herbicides for broadleaf weeds include 2,4-D, dicamba, triclopyr, mecoprop, often abbreviated MCPP, and fluroxypyr. If you miss the application window for a pre-emergent herbicide of annual grassy weeds, some post-emergent options exist. Warm season grassy weeds can be controlled with the post-emergent herbicides of quincloric, mesotrione, and phenoxyprop. Here is a very general look at optimal and acceptable timings for herbicides based upon the weeds they can control. The green lines with arrows on each end indicate the period of active growth for cool season and warm season broadleaf weeds. The maroon lines with the diamond shapes on each end represent the optimal time for post-emergent control of broadleaf weeds and is at a time when they have typically finished flowering and their growth has slowed down. This optimal time also has the added bonus of when cool season turfgrasses are most actively growing. The dotted line in black represents an acceptable time for pre-emergence controls of perennial broadleaf weeds, which have more difficult to predict emergence patterns. Let's quickly review the steps of making an effective herbicide application. You should start by correctly identifying the weed, setting threshold levels, selecting the appropriate product, calibrating your equipment properly, calculating and measuring the herbicide accurately, applying the product uniformly over the treatment area, and finally, you should monitor the results of the application. To sum up this module, correctly identifying and understanding the weed's biology is essential to controlling it. You may need to remedy an underlying problem with the site itself to reduce weed competition. If a weed needs to be controlled with an herbicide, consult and follow the product label. Finally, and most importantly, a dense, healthy turf is the best defense against weeds. Thank you for participating in this weed control module. You will be able to apply many of the principles you learned about weed control with the next module that introduces other forms of turf pests.